Hello and welcome back to All About Russia. My name is Andrew and today we're going to be looking at the smallest federal republic in the Russian Federation, the Republic of Ingushetia. The Republic of Ingushetia, or Galgai Mok in its native English, is located in the south of Russia, in the North Caucasian Federal District and in the North Caucasian Economic Region. Within the Russian Federation, it shares borders with the Republic of Chechnya to the east and the Republic of North Ossetia-Lalnia to the west and north, whilst internationally it shared a border with the nation of Georgia to the south. The name of the republic comes from its dominant ethnic group, the English, who call themselves the Galgai, which, in their native language, translates to the people of the fortresses. The republic is a mere 1,401 square meters in size. It is the 81st largest and first smallest federal republic in the Russian Federation. It also makes the nation only slightly larger than that of Samoa. As of the 2010 census, the republic boasts a population of just under 500,000 people, making it the 75th largest federal subject by population, and with more people living here than in Guadalupe. The capital of the republic is Magas, which boasts a population of just over 2,500. Just to remind you, Anadyr, the capital of the Chukotka Autonomous Okrug, which hugs the Arctic Circle, has a population 5 times larger than this. This is in part because the capital Magas has only been the capital since the year 2000. Before that, it was the city of Nazran, which boasts a much larger population. The name comes from the capital of the ancient Alans. The city is supposedly built on the foundations of that same settlement. Over a fifth of Ingushetia is forested, with the mountainous nature of the land enabling just under a fifth to be put under plough. Like many lands in the Caucasus Range, Ingushetia is very mountainous, and its difficult terrain has played an important role in its history. The tallest mountain in the republic is Mount Shan, at nearly 4,500 meters. Its name comes from the English word shen, meaning glacier or iced. The longest river in the republic is the river Asa, of which 56 miles flow through Ingushetia. Curiously, the origins of the name of this river are quite heavily disputed, with a prominent theory being that it derived from an ancient English word for unbeliever, possibly referring back to the mid-6th century when the unbelieving Khazars arrived in their land. The flag of Ingushetia is a red triskelion. Yes, that's what it's called, on a white background fringed with green at the top and bottom. Adopted on the 11th of July 1999, the triskelion is said to represent the sun, the universe, and the perpetual nature of the soul of the English people, the red representing overcoming the struggles of the past and present. The white is said to represent purity of both thought and deed, whilst the green represents both Islam, the dominant religion of the English, and the fertility of their land. Given its small size, Ingushetia only has 5 administrative districts, with the capital Magas serving as its own administrative district. The entire region runs on Moscow Standard Time. The Republic of Ingushetia does have an anthem, which is playing right now, and I will include a link below for those of you who are interested. Human settlement in Ingushetia can be traced back to 40,000 years BC, with evidence of stone tools being found in the Nazranka River. Archaeologists believe these were likely made by Neanderthals, judging by the crudeness of the tools themselves. Whilst it's hard to say when Homo sapiens certainly entered Ingushetia, a prominent theory based on linguistic evidence suggests a migration from the Fertile Crescent around the year 10,000 BC. Whether this is true or not, we do not know. However, records from both Armenian and Georgian sources record there being a people living in modern Ingushetia around the year 500 BC, called the Zerduks. This record is supported by the later Greek writer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BC, who records the Galgai as living in the area. This is of course the same name that the English call themselves, and is actually the first written record of them in history. Through a mixture of archaeological and historic accounts, historians have concluded that Ingushetia was part of the Kuban Bronze Age culture, a wider trading and cultural sphere which spanned the North Caucasus. Furthermore, Georgian record states multiple diplomatic and royal marriages with the Galgai. Whether the Galgai had been united or already operated on smaller clan-based levels by the 1st century is hard to say. All we know for certain is that by that same 1st century, they were fragmented. A popular theory is that this fragmentization occurred when the Alans arrived to the north, putting pressure on the Ingush. Personally, this theory holds a lot of water as it coincides with the construction of the Nak towers that litter Ingushetia. By the advent of the 2nd century, at least in some parts of Ingushetia, Alans ruled. What is worth mentioning at this point is that historic Ingushetia was much larger than it is today, comprising territory not only in North Ossetia-Lania, but also in neighbouring Chechnya. This idea of lost lands is very important for the Ingush narrative, and we will see it repeated time and time again throughout this video. The history of Ingushetia, like many other places in the North Caucasus, is littered with blank spots, periods of time where little or nothing was recorded about what was going on. As such, it's very hard to gauge what the relationship was like between the Alanians and the Ingush. Ingushetia comes more into light in the 7th century with the arrival of the Khazars and later the Arab invasions. The Ingush lands saw first the Alanians oppose the Khazars in the earlier part of the 7th century, only to eventually throw their lot in with them when faced with a much larger Arab invasion from the south. Ingush lands became a battleground between Khazar Alanian troops and Arab invaders, though if you have seen our video on Dagestan, you'll remember that this area was not the main scene of fighting. With Arab-held Georgia to the south, Ingushetia remained a battleground between competing armies. This meant that Alanian rule was relatively light, as the Ingush clans became more self-reliant and independently minded. When the threat of Arab invasion dwindled in the 9th century, and Khazar authority cracked under pressure from the north, Georgian influence, a traditional influence and partner in Ingush relations, returned, travelling further still onto the neighbouring Alanians. The 10th century saw Georgian and Byzantine missionaries bring Christianity to the neighbouring Alans, though the structure of Alanian society meant that this likely started with the aristocracy and trickled its way downward. This is so much so that the Ingush tribes, being quite far removed from the Alanian aristocracy, did not receive any real conversion attempts or pressure until the 12th century. Though we know this conversion effort was largely led by Georgian missionaries, the extent of their success is hard to say, as during the 13th century a new invader arrived, one that destroyed much of the previous history: the Mongols. The hoofbeats of the Mongols were heard in the chasms of Ingushetia, destroying the Alanian capital of Magas and sending many Ingush into the hills fleeing for their lives. The rugged nature of Ingushetia, as well as the fierce, self-reliant English clan system, led the Mongols to get bogged down in a guerrilla campaign for much of Ingushetia. The Mongols saw value in large population centres where they could tax and extort from, not hill tribes scattered over a vast hostile terrain. As such, Ingushetia was largely left alone for much of the Mongol rule, bar sporadic raids or punitive expeditions. Eventually, over time, Mongol interest and presence in Ingushetia grew less and less as attentions elsewhere took their forces away. But the Ingush barely had a chance to reclaim the fertile but depopulated lowlands as a new invader arrived, the Circassians to the west. Attempting to colonize these depopulated areas, the Circassians came under attack again and again, much as the Mongols had, by bands of independent and fiercely resistant Ingush fighters. This was so much so that the prince of the Circassians, Timiruk, actually asked his ally to aid him in sending these highland raiders to flight, and so he asked for Russian assistance. Tsar Ivan the Terrible obliged, and for the first time in Ingush history, Russian boots walked Ingush soil, defeating the Ingush in 1562. This marks the third time in Ingush history where their land was reluctantly abandoned. But it would not be forgotten, nor sadly would it be the last. Neither the Russians, nor the Circassians, nor the Ingush could safely settle the northern parts of Ingushetia, in what are now North Ossetia, Lania and Stavropol Krai. heavily underpopulated and hardly safe to settle, the area became something of a no man's land, with only criminals and vagabonds inhabiting it. Throughout the 16th century, imams began arriving from Dagestan and Chechnya to spread the Quran among the English tribesmen. Due to the independence of the English clans, as well as their previous religious affiliations to both Christianity and even older pagan beliefs, Islam spread slowly among the English, having to be accepted by the entire tribe before moving on. In 1711, Terek Cossacks began migrating to those vacant English lands, pushing ever further the bounds of the Tsardom of Russia. By 1781, attacks on these Cossacks had become so frequent that they had built a krepost, or fortress, to protect themselves. A fortress they named Nazran. At this point in time, Tsarina Elizabeth II was expanding her realm and sent a force in 1784 to secure the English village of Zaur. This was to secure communications with her neighbouring ally, soon to be vassal, Georgia. The village was taken, the English were killed, and the settlement was renamed to Vladikavkaz. This encroachment was bitterly resisted, and many English clans fought and died to preserve their territory. But threats to the English were not just to the north. 1785 saw Sheikh Mansur of Dagestan attempt to wage a jihad on the pagan hillsmen of Ingushetia. Rallying together, the English tribes defeated the Dagestanis and Chechens who had joined them in an attempted conquest of their native land. Whether the English liked it or not, the world was changing, and new forces were coming to encroach on their territory. The year 1810 is a significant one in the history of Ingushetia. Ambassadors from the Russian Empire arrived in Ingushetia and convinced two clans to submit their loyalty to the Tsar. The remaining 300-odd clans refused to bow to the Tsar. Yet these two clans proved the casus belli for one of the most destructive periods in English history, the Russian invasion of Ingushetia. As was happening across the Caucasus at this time, a gradual Russian encroachment occurred, with troops and Cossacks moving ever further onto native land. Amid this encroachment, a terrible déjà vu occurred, as in 1829, Imam Shamil, the Lion of Dagestan, attempted to invade. At this point, Islam had been in Ingushetia for around 300 years, and his invasion did garner some support from certain English clans. But as before, many didn't, and the Lion was forced to abandon his jihad and pull back to Dagestan. But this was a rare win for the English, and by 1857, Russian dominance was clear, and much of Ingushetia was occupied by Tsarist troops. Attempts to bar the English from living on the best farmland and in traditional settlements near to the Russian forts led to great unrest, and in 1858 a huge uprising occurred near Nazran of over 5,000 English warriors. Despite their bravery and the justness of their cause, the English were defeated and left with a stark choice, whether to leave or die. Numbers are hard to get on this, but it is thought around 80% of the English population left Ingushetia seeking refuge in the Ottoman Empire. This is a story similar with many of the people of the Caucasus around this time, particularly the Circassians. Those English who remained lived on the worst land in the hilliest, rockiest outcrops far, far away from Tsarist bases of power. Pacified, or at least in the eyes of the Tsar, the region was incorporated into the Terek Oblast in 1860. Disenfranchised within their own homeland, young Englishmen were recruited for foreign wars against the Ottomans as auxiliary units. This might seem an odd decision, but given the fact that Islam had taken longer to seed itself in Ingushetia and the English themselves had not joined Imam Shamil's religious wars against the Russians, the English were seen as more reliable and thus allowed to join the Russian army as auxiliaries and light cavalry. At the same time Russia was taking people out of Ingushetia, it was also placing them in. Russian, Cossack and Ossetians were settled on the best farmland, leading to a demographic shift that reduced what one might call Ingushetia smaller still. With the start of the First World War, and the Bolshevik Revolution that occurred in 1917, the Caucasus as a whole wrenched itself free from Russian imperialism. The English were represented at the Great Pan-Caucasian Meeting that heralded the creation of the Mountain Republic of the North Caucasus. This state, of which Ingushetia was but a small part, was a fragile piece at best between dozens of different ethnic groups with different motivations and different aims. In March of 1918, Bolsheviks seized power along the Terek and created the Terek Soviet Socialist Republic, including Ingushetia. Bolshevism actually held great appeal for many English, promising national autonomy as well as being largely left alone by the state. When Admiral Denikin invaded in February of 1919, this turned many English to conduct a guerrilla campaign against his troops in the valleys and chasms of Ingushetia. As a result, Ingushetia always remained never really under white control and would remain a thorn in Denikin's side for the rest of his command. When the Bolsheviks triumphed in March of 1920, the previous administrative borders were abolished and Ingushetia was included into the Mountain Soviet Socialist Republic. This was revised a year later to the Mountain Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, before being liquidated entirely 3 years after that. From 1924, Ingushetia would remain an autonomous okrug within the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic. Though seen as far away and relatively irrelevant to the great powers of Moscow, that is not to say there was no investment and development in Ingushetia. There was. It just so happened a lot of this was based around the then capital of Ingushetia, Vladikavkaz. What is today Ingushetia received only the dregs and drips of Soviet investment. In 1934, the English Autonomous Okrug was blended with the Chechen Autonomous Okrug to create the Chechen English Oblast. This decision was based on both proximity and anthropology. As well as being right next to each other, the English and the Chechens are both Anak people. Their languages are so similar, both populations practice passive bilingualism, meaning they can understand what the other is saying, though they have never studied the language. Yet, despite these factors, they are not the same people. And this is a fact that will come more to light later in this video. In June of 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union as part of Operation Barbarossa. Being in the Caucasus, Ingushetia was initially far from the conflict. But as the Germans pushed ever eastward, in September 1942 they entered the territory of the then Chechen English Autonomous Oblast. Despite never entering Ingushetia proper and being halted around Vladikavkaz, the fact that Germans had been able to penetrate so deeply into this region worried Joseph Stalin. This was because, if you remember from our video on the Republic of Chechnya, an anti-Soviet partisan group made up of Chechens had emerged around this period. Despite the fact the English were not involved in this, their similarity to the Chechens put them in a bad light with Stalin. And this would have terrible consequences. On the 23rd of February 1944, an order was sent across the Soviet Union. The English, along with the Chechens, Balkars and others, had, as a nation, turned traitor against the Soviet Union, supposedly aiding German forces throughout the war. 100,000 NKVD, supplemented with Ossetian and Georgian auxiliaries, had been sent to Ingushetia on the pretext of repairing roads. Some of these troops had even been billeted with English families. On the 23rd of February 1944, the entire English nation, men, women and children, were bundled onto trains and deported to the deserts of Central Asia. Hard figures are difficult to come by, but one account holds there were over 92,000 English citizens in 1944. Of that number, over 27,000 died in exile. A few days later, on March the 7th, the Chechen English Autonomous Oblast was wholly liquidated, and the English lands given to the loyal Ossetians. For 12 long years, Ingushetia ceased to be. The English scattered to the four winds. Eventually, on the 16th of July 1956, some restrictions on the English and Chechens were lifted, and they were permitted to finally return home. The Chechen English Autonomous Oblast was restored, but with some important changes. The Prigorod and Mozrok regions remained with North Ossetia. Whilst in neighbouring Chechnya riots had broken out, in Ingushetia it remained tense but civil. Those who could bought back their houses, while those who could not lived where they could, content at least to be on home soil. This outrage was not forgotten nor forgiven, and in 1973, with the general thaw in the Soviet Union, huge crowds appeared in Grozny of Ingush demanding their lands back, demanding their homes to be returned. This protest was so large that Soviet troops were actually called in to help break it up. In 1989, as part of a wider project across the USSR, the Ingush were rehabilitated, with all official restrictions and blacklists against them removed. This meant that the Ingush were now free to attend any university they wished and live and work anywhere in the Soviet Union. However, as this was near the tail end of the Soviet Union's time, this did not have a massive cultural impact on the Ingush themselves. Similarly, their decision in 1991 to go from an autonomous republic to a full Soviet republic was very much a case of too little, too late. By this time, the Soviet Union was falling into shambles, and since 1990, neighbouring Chechnya had been grumbling for their independence. In October 1991, against the backdrop of unrest in Moscow, the Chechen and English parts of the republic split. This was more of a case of Chechnya seceding rather than Ingushetia leaving, though a referendum was held in November of that year to confirm that Ingushetia wanted to remain a part of the Russian Federation. And the reasons why they did so are rather curious. Whilst the Chechens and the Ingush had had similar experiences under communism, it could be argued that the Ingush lacked a fiery and determined, independently minded leadership during the 1990s, and this was the deciding factor for staying within the Russian Federation. That said, there is another factor here which differs quite largely from neighbouring Chechnya. Throughout English history, their land was chipped away by foreign powers, and under the Soviet Constitution of 1977, provisions were made for the reclamation of lost land during injustices. Having been rehabilitated, and by staying within the Russian Federation, a legal argument thus existed for English reclamation of lands that had been taken away from them, notably the Prigorodny region, which had been taken by another Russian federal subject. Ingushetia, like much of the Russian Federation, was restless during 1992. Whilst events elsewhere took national attention, the fuse in Ingushetia was fully lit on the 20th of October, when unknown Ossetians in Prigorodny murdered a slew of Ingush in the same region. This was followed by the murder of another English resident by 2 Ossetian policemen 2 days later. News of these atrocities spread like wildfire across the English communities of both North Ossetia and Ingushetia. Militias rapidly formed, and tit-for-tat killings erupted across Prigorodny and other parts of North Ossetia. Both Ossetian and English families were raped, dismembered, and otherwise tortured during a heinous few days. Russian internal troops were rapidly deployed to try and keep the peace, but were widely recognized as aiding the Ossetians more than the Ingush. This was in part a legacy of Ossetians being favored by the Russian governments. By the 1st of November, a state of emergency was declared in both Ingushetia and North Ossetia, with internal Russian troops evacuating civilians in both republics. The Prigorodny region was essentially ethnically cleansed, going from an English minority to a near wholly Ossetian state. Around 60,000 English refugees poured into Ingushetia, and a détente was not fully reached until 1994. This issue has not been resolved, and despite the Ossetiization of the Prigorodny region, the English government still claimed this area as a rightful part of their own republic. In 1994, 3 important things happened in Ingushetia. On the 15th of April, construction began on the new capital of Ingushetia, on the supposed remains of the original Alanian, now Ossetian, capital. Secondly, a special economic area was established in Ingushetia, meaning that taxes were significantly lower or even abolished for many residents. This was not a good thing, as it was introduced because of the dire state of the economy in Ingushetia. However, the third and probably most important thing was the eruption of the First Chechen War. Other channels have done a tremendous job in explaining the factors and fallout of this war, so I shan't do that here today. What we shall be exploring is how this affected Ingushetia. As the bombs fell, a steady stream of Chechen refugees poured into struggling Ingushetia. This led to complaints being made to Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Federation, from Ruslan Alshev, the then president of Ingushetia, as not only were the English expected to feed and house these refugees with minimal state support, but the Russian army had accidentally shelled some English villages in the pandemonium. The eventual ceasefire that erupted did little to stem the tide, and throughout the interwar years, a steady stream of Chechens fleeing the radicalization of their country appeared in Ingushetia. This radicalization wasn't just limited to Chechnya, however, and many English men began moving into Chechnya, called by the Wahhabist cause. When the Second Chechen War erupted, another flood of refugees entered Ingushetia, raising the numbers of Ingush to Chechens as high as 1-to-1. As Russian forces flattened Chechnya and installed Ramzan Kadyrov as the leader of the Chechen people, peace gradually returned, and the number of Chechens in Ingushetia gradually reduced. The Chechen insurgency that erupted as a result of this war wasn't limited to Chechnya itself, and throughout the 2000s, raids on English villages were not uncommon. Counter-terrorism operations were declared a success in 2016. However, throughout this time there have been numerous terrorist attacks of an Islamic nature on the innocents of Ingushetia. 6 years after construction started, the new capital of Magas was complete, and it marked a new Ingushetia. This was so much so that in 2001, an offer to reunite with Chechnya was turned down by the Ingush administration. English future would be their own, but it was marked with several problems. Throughout the 2000s, investment was limited and anti-terror operations were rampant across the Republic. An exodus of young men to the richer cities in Russia proper continued, leaving Ingushetia deprived and impoverished. In 2018, mass protests erupted in Ingushetia. The reasons for these protests wasn't due to poverty or the economic situation, but due to the fact that an agreement had been made with Chechnya, where the English gave Chechnya 9% of its already small territory. Officially, the English were compensated for this land, but given the sensitive topic of land loss in English history, this ignited many passions, and thousands took to the streets. So why? Why did President Yunus Bek of Ingushetia agree to give 9% of his land to Chechnya? Despite the official reason of cash compensation, the truth is rather worrying. Allegedly, Kadyrov had threatened to use his own troops to flatten out and occupy the area should Yunus and the English refuse. Yunus was forced to quit, and today Ingushetia is a smaller, poorer and less illustrious land than it once was. But nevertheless, it and the English people have survived to the 21st century. As before stated, the economy in Ingushetia is dire, with unemployment being the highest here in anywhere in the Russian Federation at just over 30% as of 2021. Most of Ingushetia is agricultural, with sunflowers, potatoes and sugar beets all grown in large numbers here. Heavy industry is focused on particular areas, including the former capital of Nazran, where oil extraction makes up the bulk of the industry. Oddly, there are no major electrical power stations in Ingushetia. This is because over the last 20 years, several attempts to create this have stopped and started, normally due to funds either going missing or running out. As a result, Ingushetia is a net importer of electricity, including from neighbouring Chechnya. As of the 2010 census, the population of Ingushetia stands at a little over 400,000, with a capital of only 2,500 residents. Of this population, 94.1% were ethnic Ingush, with 4.6% being Chechens, 0.8% identifying as Russians, and 0.5% made up of other nationalities, according to the 2010 census. As of the 2014 survey, 96% of residents in Ingushetia are Muslim, with a minority of Christians at 2%, atheists at 1%, and all other religions at 1%. The birth rate in the Republic is 1.85 children per woman. Drug abuse in the Republic is incredibly low, with only 0.73 incidents per 100,000. Alcoholism is even lower, with 0.43 incidents per 100,000 people. This is in fact the lowest alcoholism rate in the whole of the Russian Federation, lower even than neighbouring Chechnya. The head of the Republic is Mahmoud Ali Kalimatov, who's been in power since being appointed by Putin on the 26th of June 2019. He is an ethnic Ingush who was born in Kazakhstan to the English diaspora there, and replaced Yunusbek Yevkurov, who stood down after mass protests against giving land to Chechnya. Ingushetia is far away from the more popular tourist traps in Russia. If you were to travel to this distant land, however, you may see some of the dramatic architecture and scenery it has to offer. Should you travel here, you might see the Tahabi Yurdi Church, the oldest church in the entirety of the Russian Federation, the Towers of Ezri, which date from around the 1st century AD, or the Memorial of Memory and Glory in Nazran, which commemorates those Ingush who have died over the years in their struggle to survive. Ingushetia is the smallest part of the Russian Federation, but boasts some of the richest culture and history and some of the most beautiful landscapes. Ingushetia is a land of mountains and valleys, and every inch of it is precious to the English people, soaked in both blood and memories. My name is Andrew, and thank you for watching. Up next is the Irkutsk Blast. Пока!